Okay, so today we're going deep on a topic that is pretty alarming and sadly increasingly relevant. It's the air quality crisis in Delhi. We've got a whole stack of recent news reports and articles, and you, our listener, wanted the breakdown on just how bad it is, what's causing all this, and what people are actually trying to do about it.
Yeah, it's a situation that definitely deserves a closer look, especially because the solutions they're exploring in Delhi could end up having implications for other cities around the world that are dealing with similar problems.
Exactly. So let's jump right in. One of the first things that really struck me was just how drastically bad the situation is. Like on November 19th, Delhi's air pollution was over 60 times the safe limit. That's not just bad, that's like the most polluted city on Earth. And not just for one day, this happened 2 days in a row.
Yeah, and it's really hard to grasp the severity of that without understanding what that measurement actually means. The air quality index, or AQI, it's not just some abstract number. It's based on the concentration of dangerous pollutants like PM 2.5. These tiny particles that can actually lodge deep in your lungs and cause all kinds of problems.
Okay, so high AQI equals lots of harmful stuff in the air.
Got it.
Got it. But what does that actually look like for the people in Delhi? Like, what are they actually experiencing there?
Well, just imagine a city shrouded in this thick gray smog. Visibility gets so low it's dangerous to drive. And for a lot of people, simply breathing outside feels like they're just inhaling exhaust fumes constantly. The articles describe it as this constant haze, this visual reminder of just how hazardous the air is.
That's scary. And it's startling to think that this isn't like a one-day event. Delhi's AQI has been labeled severe for 5 days in a row. That means that even healthy people who aren't already vulnerable are at risk for some serious health problems. The news reports were highlighting that Delhi's first pollution-related illness clinic has been just absolutely swamped with people who are struggling to breathe.
It's just a stark reminder of those immediate health risks that this level of pollution poses. Respiratory infections, aggravated asthma, COPD. We're talking about eye irritation, headaches, even an increased risk of things like heart problems and strokes. And that's not even considering the potential long-term consequences, which we're still studying.
Yeah, it sounds really dire. So what steps are the authorities taking to try and tackle this crisis?
Well, the Indian government has activated stage 4 of what's called the Graded Response Action Plan, or GRAP. This is essentially their highest level of emergency response.
Wow.
And it's understandable why they had to go this far. They're trying to curb emissions very quickly, and that means targeting the biggest sources of the problem.
So what does GRP's Stage 4V actually entail?
Well, they've taken some pretty drastic measures. They've closed all the schools. They've halted all non-essential construction and demolition to reduce dust. They're also restricting the entry of heavily polluting trucks and diesel vehicles.
Wow, shutting down schools and construction, that's a huge disruption to daily life. Are there any other measures they're thinking about taking?
Well, they're strongly encouraging people to work from home if they can. And there's even talk of implementing something called the odd-even vehicle rationing scheme. That basically means private cars with license plates that end in an odd number can only drive on certain days and even-numbered plates on other days. It's a measure they've actually used before in these situations.
It sounds like they're pulling out all the stops, but is it working?
Well, that's the concerning part. Despite all these efforts, the air quality still remains in the severe plus category. It really raises the question of just what exactly is causing this level of pollution in the first place.
I was thinking the same thing when I was going through all these articles. It seems like they don't really go into much detail about, the root causes of this whole problem.
You're absolutely right. That is a noticeable gap in the information that they provided.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if these emergency measures are struggling to make a real dent. Are they even addressing the core issues? What are the primary drivers of this pollution? Is it industrial activity? Is it all the vehicles? Or is it something else entirely?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's so easy to get caught up in the immediacy of this crisis and the emergency response, but without understanding those underlying causes, finding truly effective and lasting solutions is just going to be that much harder. And that's true not just for Delhi, but for any city around the world that might be facing this kind of challenge.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
It really is. It's fascinating. We can see the effects of something like this pollution so clearly.
Yeah.
But the causes can be so much more complex and kind of hidden. I'm curious, even though these articles don't really spell out the main drivers of all this pollution in Delhi, can we glean any insights just based on what we do know about what's happening and the kinds of measures that they're taking?
Absolutely. I mean, even though we don't have all the answers specifically about Delhi right now, We can still look at this situation and what's happening there and kind of view it through the lens of global air pollution trends and patterns. It's like piecing together a puzzle. We might be missing a couple of pieces, but we can still make some educated guesses about that overall picture.
That makes a lot of sense. So what kinds of things, what kinds of factors usually contribute to air pollution in big cities like this?
Well, vehicular emissions are a big one, a major culprit. Delhi has a huge number of cars on the road and trucks, too. And the sources did mention, restrictions on those diesel vehicles, which suggests that they're a pretty significant source of all these pollutants.
Right. And with a city the size of Delhi traffic congestion must be like a daily reality, leading to even more of those emissions. What else should we be considering here?
Well, industrial activity is another big one. Factories and power plants, they release all kinds of pollutants into the air. Even though these articles don't go into detail about Delhi's specific industrial landscape, the fact that they went so far as to halt construction tells us that they're very aware of the impact of dust and all that particulate matter. So it wouldn't be surprising at all if industrial emissions were playing a pretty big role in this whole crisis as well.
That stands to reason for sure. Anything else that we can kind of extrapolate based on what we've got here?
Well, the fact that they're restricting all those trucks that are trying to enter the city from outside raises another interesting possibility: agricultural practices. Crop burning in neighboring states has actually been a major contributing factor to Delhi's pollution in the past. So it's definitely possible that all these agricultural activities, even though they're not happening right in the city itself, might still be having a real impact on Delhi's air quality.
Okay, so we've got those vehicular emissions, we've got the industrial activity, and potentially even those agricultural practices as possible drivers of this. What about geographical factors? Could Delhi's location or even the climate be making this problem even worse?
That's a great point. Delhi is situated in a valley which unfortunately can trap pollutants and prevent them from dispersing as quickly. Plus, this time of year, they're experiencing cooler temperatures and slower wind speeds, which further hinders the natural ventilation of the city. So yeah, those geographical and meteorological factors, they can definitely make a bad situation even worse.
It's like a perfect storm of different elements coming together.
Yeah, these sources might not be giving us all the specifics, but just knowing the context of global pollution trends and Delhi's unique situation really gives us a much better understanding of what might be going on here. Exactly. It's like a detective game, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're using the clues that we do have to paint a more complete picture of this problem. And even though the focus is on Delhi right now, this exploration really helps us understand the complexity of air pollution in general, which is something that a lot of cities all over the world are having to deal with more and more.
Speaking of that global context, it feels like there's a bigger conversation to be had here. I mean, we've talked about all those immediate health risks, but what about the broader economic and societal impacts of this kind of air quality crisis?
That's a really crucial aspect that often gets overlooked. I mean, think about all the economic consequences of these school closures, the work stoppages, the potential drops in tourism, not to mention the added burden that this is putting on the healthcare system as they're trying to deal with this influx of all these pollution-related illnesses. These costs can be really substantial, both in terms of those immediate expenses and then the long-term economic productivity as well.
It really makes you realize that environmental issues are very rarely isolated problems. They have all these ripple effects that touch every single part of society.
Precisely. And that's why tackling a problem like air pollution is going to require such a multifaceted approach. Emergency measures like this GRECU plan are super important for immediate mitigation, but they're not a sustainable solution in the long run.
It feels like putting a Band-Aid on a much deeper wound.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, it really is a wake-up call. Even though we don't have all the answers about the specific things that are causing all this pollution in Delhi right now, this deep dive has shown just how complex these issues are and how interconnected they all are.
For sure. It really is like peeling back the layers of an onion, you know? We started with this alarming situation happening in Delhi, and as we've kind of dug deeper into it, it's revealing all these broader themes about things like urbanization, industrialization, and all those environmental challenges that just kind of naturally come with them.
It also gets you thinking about the role of individual actions versus like big systemic change. I mean, what can one person even do when you're facing a problem this big?
Right. That's a question so many people are asking. It's so easy to feel powerless when you're dealing with a crisis of this magnitude. But the truth is that individual actions, especially when they're multiplied across a huge population, can make a real difference.
So where do we even begin?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's about awareness. You know, understanding the problem is always the first step toward finding real solutions. We've talked about a lot of the potential causes of this air pollution, and I think it's important for all of us to look at our own lives and try to see where we might be contributing to this kind of problem.
Even things like our transportation choices,
Yeah.
how much energy we're using, even the products that we buy.
Exactly. Even small changes in our daily habits can make a difference, especially when we do it collectively. Choosing to walk or bike or take public transportation instead of driving alone, cutting back on our energy use at home, supporting businesses that are making sustainability a real priority. These are all steps in the right direction.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that our individual choices are all part of this larger system, right?
Precisely. And beyond our own personal actions, we can be advocating for change at a broader level, too. Supporting policies that promote clean energy investing in public transportation, holding those big industries accountable for their emissions. Make your voice heard. Whether it's contacting your elected officials, joining some community groups, or supporting organizations that are working on this problem.
So it sounds like fixing something this big requires both individual action and these bigger systemic changes.
It absolutely does. And it's not something that's going to change overnight, unfortunately. But every single step we take, no matter how small it might seem, it moves us closer to a healthier, more sustainable future for everybody.
So for our listener out there, what's the main takeaway from all of this? What can they do with all this newfound knowledge?
I think the biggest takeaway here is that air pollution is everyone's problem. No matter where you live, it affects all of us. What's happening in Delhi right now is a really stark reminder of what happens when we don't take action, but it also presents an opportunity for us to learn from this situation and adapt, and maybe even find better ways to live in harmony with our environment.
This call to action for all of us, I think, to become more informed, more engaged, and much more proactive in creating the kind of world that we want to live in.
Exactly. A world where clean air isn't some kind of luxury, but a fundamental right for every single person.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. As always, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better future.
Until next time, stay curious.